Hi, I'm Alan Smith. This time of year, I always get lots of gardening questions from viewers and people I meet every day about what they should be doing in their gardens to prepare for the growing season. Over the years, I've discovered that certain topics come up time and time again. In today's show, I'll provide helpful tips and hands-on projects centering around the 10 topics that seem to be of most concern to gardeners in the spring. So let's get started.
Welcome back to the Top 10 Questions for Spring in Your Garden with P. Alan Smith.
Lawn care can basically be broken down into three main categories: watering, fertilizing, and mowing. Let's take them one at a time, and we'll start with watering. You can encourage deep root growth, which will help your grass survive the hot, dry days to come by thoroughly watering your lawn, allowing the water to really soak in. Also, let your lawn dry out completely before you re-water. This will help cut down on pests and disease. To further help with these problems, water in the early morning. This will give your grass time to dry during the day. Now, when I fertilize a lawn, I like to use a spreader like this one to make sure I get even coverage over the entire area. It's best to fertilize just after the lawn's been mowed and when the grass is dry. When mowing, if you raise the blade on your lawnmower just a bit, the longer blades of grass will shade the roots from the hot sun, helping to retain moisture, especially during the summer. And always make sure the blade of your mower is sharp. Every time I visit a garden center or nursery in the spring, I'm always dazzled by all the beautiful flowers and the various colors. I want to take each one of them home with me. But you know, that's not always the best approach for a well-designed garden. So to help me focus, I let color be my guide. I'm often asked if there are any basic rules of thumb to follow when using color in the garden. Color can evoke certain moods. Reds and oranges can make you feel hot, while pale blues and pale lavenders can evoke a restful, cool feeling. The other thing these hot and cool colors seem to do is play with our sense of space. You see, hot reds jump forward and make a space seem smaller, whereas subtle colors like pale blue make a space feel much more expansive. Another design tip to consider is that planting in large drifts of the same color or color family can have a much more dramatic impact than just planting a few of varying colors. And remember, green is a color too. There are many plants, such as hostas and ferns, which have foliage that's just as attractive as the blooms on other plants. So often I hear people say, you know, I'd really love to have a garden, but I don't have the time or even have a yard. Well, one simple solution is to garden in containers. When I plant a container, I find it helpful to stick with one color theme. And when I put it together, I always start with a large, bold plant in the back, and then use something to cascade down the front of the container, and then fill in with intermediate-sized plants. Now, I put all of these design principles to work recently when I put together a container for my porch, and it all started with a trip to the nursery. Even though there are so many choices to select from, I always go for the tried and true for at least a portion of the selection. Take variegated ivy. You can't believe what a few pots of this can do planted along other companion plants. They can all come together to make a knockout container for one of those awkward locations with part shade and part sun. I'm working with a predominantly cool color theme of green and white with a touch of pink. Now, with the potting soil already in place, I'm going to start building the container from the back to the front, This is important because this container will be placed against a wall. I've selected this large leaf caladium for height and bold texture, and I'm filling in this mid area with pink impatiens and these Japanese painted ferns. And to give this combination a finishing touch, I'm using white variegated ivy to cascade down the side of the container. Who needs flowers when foliage looks like this? You'll find that these ivies come in a range of leaf colors and shapes. By keeping the color theme simple and using cool colors, this container will keep its fresh look right through the hottest days of summer. And one of the nice things about the ivy and the fern is that you can always plant them in your garden for years of enjoyment. If I had to choose one garden plant that Americans always seem to get excited about, it would have to be the tomato. Its popularity never seems to let up. Some communities even have elaborate festivals to celebrate the tomato. This time of year, gardeners are anxious to get their plants in the ground. But if you want the best tomatoes possible, there's some things you may want to keep in mind. You see, pests like tomatoes as much as we do. So in order to stay one step ahead of them, I never plant mine in the same place from one year to the next. For instance, last year I planted my tomatoes in raised beds in my garden. This year I'm planting them along my fence. Pests can build up in your soil over time, so by moving your plants around, you can throw them off a bit. But one pest that always seems to find my tomatoes no matter where I plant them is the cutworm. To discourage them from taking out my young plants, I wrap the base of each seedling with a piece of aluminum foil. Then later in the season, I'll keep the caterpillars away by spraying BT. It's safe and very effective. Now, a well-fed tomato plant will provide you with a high yield, and a fun way to feed them is to use an old milk carton. Just punch a few holes in the side and the bottom of the milk carton and bury one next to each plant. Then just fill them up with water or liquid fertilizer, and the carton will release the nutrient to the plants over time. With all of my plants planted, now I'll just mulch them in and place a wire cage like this over them for support later in the season.
Spring flowering bulbs, pruning tips, and how to attract butterflies when the top 10 questions for spring in your garden returns. Welcome back to the top 10 questions for spring in your garden with P. Allen Smith.
Daffodils are very popular spring flowers, and nothing proves that point better than a daffodil show like this one. These narcissus lovers can be fierce competitors. This time of year, people are always saying to me, "I love those spring bulbs. How can I add them to my garden?" Well, if you're just now getting around to asking that question, I'm afraid it's a bit late for this year. You see, if you want beautiful tulips, daffodils, and hyacinths in your garden, you have to plant them in the fall. Now, if you already have these blooming in your garden and you want them to return next year, it's important that after the flower fades, you allow the foliage to persist. You see, it's that foliage that reinvigorates the bulb for bloom next year. If you must cut it back, wait at least 10 weeks after the flower fades, and you'll have beautiful blooms again next year. Now, if you're willing to expand your idea of exactly what a bulb is, there's some other possibilities that you can plant this time of year to enjoy in the seasons ahead. Actually, there's quite a range to choose from. You can plant a gladiolus, which grows from a structure called a corm, or you can plant canna rhizomes, or the old-fashioned dahlia, which grows from a tuber. Few things strike as much fear in the hearts of gardeners than the idea of pruning. Now, this is understandable when you consider you've taken a plant and you've babied it along, fed it and watered it for months, if not years, and then you're lopping parts of it off. Well, if pruning is done properly, you can actually improve the health and the look of a plant, and depending on the variety, increase its bloom. Everyone's seen forsythia and quince and others brutally clipped into rounded balls and shapes that look like large light bulbs. This destroys one of the most beautiful aspects of these shrubs. They're graceful, natural shapes. Now, just a few weeks ago, this bank of forsythia was in full, glorious bloom. With the flowers faded, my goal now is to preserve the integrity of the form. Now, rather than going across here and clipping the top of them with shears, I'm going to go into the center of the plant and remove many of the older canes. By removing the canes or stems from the base of the plant, this encourages lots of vigorous growth in the form of long, graceful boughs. It gives an old plant a new lease on life. You can see there's really nothing to it. It's all about following common sense and a few basic ideas, and remembering that old rule of thumb about when to prune. If it flowers after May the 15th, you want to prune it in late winter and early spring for lots of bloom in summer. If it blooms before May the 15th, like this forsythia, you want to prune it as soon as it finishes flowering, like I've done here. You may be wondering what all the excitement's about. Well, this is a parade in honor of a very special dignitary that comes here once a year. You see, they're so important that the whole town has come out to celebrate their arrival. I'm talking about the monarch butterflies of Pacific Grove, California, also known as Butterfly Town, USA. Luring butterflies to the garden can have a number of benefits. Not only do we get these fascinating visitors to observe and enjoy, but the plants we use to attract them can also add a lot of beauty to our gardens. If you want to increase the population of these showy little guys around your place, you need to provide food for two different parts of their life cycle, as larvae, or caterpillars, and as adult butterflies. Now, for larvae, you want to make sure that they have plenty of host plants to feed on. I'm planting a little extra parsley and fennel because they're excellent host plants. Some other host plants that are perhaps a little showier include Queen Anne's lace, false indigo, passion flower, asters, and various kinds of sedum. And we certainly can't forget about the old-fashioned hollyhock. It's a favorite food of the larva of the painted lady butterfly. Now, once the adult butterfly emerges from the chrysalis, it needs a different type of plant to attract it. It needs nectar-producing plants to slurp on. You see, adult butterflies use a soda straw-like structure called a proboscis to extract the nectar. And some of the flowers they're most attracted to include coreopsis, lantana, purple coneflower, and of course, butterfly bush.
Fertilizer basics, a simple herb garden, and more when the top 10 questions for spring in your garden returns. Welcome back to the top 10 questions for spring in your garden with P. Allen Smith.
Often people tell me that they're confused when they go to the nursery or garden center to buy fertilizer because of all of the numbers on the bag. Well, let's see if we can't clear that up. It's really a lot simpler than you might think. You see, on a bag of fertilizer, you get these three numbers, and they represent the three basic elements for the plant: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. What this means in 100 pounds of this blend of fertilizer is that you have 13 pounds of nitrogen, 13 pounds of phosphorus, and 13 pounds of potassium. Now, the nitrogen helps to develop lots of leafy green foliage. The phosphorus is there for flower and fruit production, and the potassium, it helps develop a strong root system. For instance, look at this bag of lawn fertilizer. It has a ratio of 29:3:4. High in nitrogen, perfect for a green, lush lawn. But for my shrubs, I prefer a much more balanced blend, such as this one, 12-12-12. Of course, if I'm feeding flowering shrubs, I always look for something that has a higher phosphorus ratio, that middle number, which will help them to bloom better. Now, phosphorus is also important for promoting blooms on your perennials, so begin feeding them in early spring with superphosphate. Of course, plants can't live on phosphorus alone. You see, the most effective way to feed the plants in your garden is to do it organically, to build a healthy soil by using compost and manure. You'll get all the chemicals found in these bags plus plenty of micronutrients. You won't believe the results. You can learn more about preparing your garden for spring at my website, pallensmith.com. There's nothing like fresh herbs straight from the garden for spicing up your cooking through the spring and summer. But if you don't already have an herb garden, how can you get started? Well, one of the easiest ways I've found is to use one of these terracotta strawberry jars. If you plant in one of these, a great way to water them is just to drill some holes in a piece of 2-inch PVC pipe and set it in the container on some pieces of broken terracotta. Then stabilize it by adding a few inches of gravel in and around the bottom of the pipe. Once it's planted, you can water through the pipe. I recently planted one using different types of thyme, but the same technique can be used for other herbs. Let me show you how I did it. Thyme is a Mediterranean herb that grows on rocky hillsides. It needs very good drainage. So even though I'm starting with a basic potting mix, I'm adding a generous amount of sand. Once it's well blended, I'll put it into the jar up to the first opening. Now I'm ready to add the plants. As you put the thyme in, don't worry about being a little rough with them. They can take it. I find it easier to slip them through the inside of the jar and gently pull foliage through like this. Now I'll just continue the process, alternating plants and soil until I get to the top of the jar.
Alan covers the most popular topic in the garden when the top 10 questions for spring in your garden returns. Welcome back to the top 10 questions for spring in your garden with P. Alan Smith.
Well, here we are at number 1. I get more questions about how to keep roses looking their best than any other category we've discussed today. I think it's safe to say that the rose is the most popular flower in America. There's so many different varieties of roses out there in the market today. It's really quite amazing. And they all fall into various categories. Each of these has its own desirable characteristics. The hybrid teas are probably the most popular category. They have long stems which make them good for cutting, and their blooms have a classic form. Running a close second to the hybrid tea in popularity is the Floribunda. They're lower growing and produce hundreds of small blooms and clusters all through the summer. An even more carefree category would be the antique roses. They can make large shrubs, and they're well known for their vigor and sweet aroma. And for the person with limited space, there are the miniatures, perfectly suited for container gardening. Then there are the climbers, and just as the name implies, they'll climb all over the place. If you plant one of these, you need to make sure you have plenty of room. This beauty is one of David Austin's English roses. This guy has combined the best of both worlds. He's taken the fragrance of old-fashioned roses and crossed them with the continuous bloom of modern hybrids. When you're planting your roses, placing them properly in the garden is critical. You want to make sure that they get at least 6 hours of direct sunlight a day. As for the soil, you want a good rich garden loam that's well drained. The size of the hole needs to be at least large enough to spread all of the roots out and about 14 to 18 inches deep. Now once these little guys are nestled into their new home, in just a few months you won't believe the results. Coleus are beautiful foliage plants, typically sought after for their bright colors and the texture they add to the landscape. Coleus come in a kaleidoscopic range of colors and can take both sun and shade. Another reason to choose Coleus for your summer garden is because Coleus produce little, if no, allergy-causing pollen. I hope that today's show has helped answer some of your spring gardening questions. Of course, the main thing to remember, whether you're a beginning or advanced gardener, is to get out in your garden and enjoy this glorious and beautiful time of year. From the garden, I'm Alan Smith.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.